Welcome to Startup Spokane, where hosts Megan Halsey and Steve Traben explore the excitement and momentum growing throughout Spokane's startup community. Startup Spokane is brought to you in part by Greater Spokane Incorporated's Startup Spokane and Well Dressed Walrus. Now, here are your hosts, Steve and Megan.
Welcome to Startup Spokane on Spokane Talks Media, your podcast home for everything entrepreneurship related in the Spokane region. I'm your host, Steve Traben, joined as usual by Miss Megan Halsey. Thanks for being here. As you know, Startup Spokane is a program of Greater Spokane Incorporated, and whether you have an idea, you're launching, or you're growing your business, we're here to help you get access to the resources that'll help you be successful. So, Megan, we have a very, very special guest today, so why don't you introduce?
Yeah, we're really excited today that we are being joined by the Honorable David Condon, Mayor of Spokane. And Mayor, we know that entrepreneurship isn't something that's new to you. You have some experience in this. Can you tell us a little bit about your foray in entrepreneurship?
Sure. I grew up in a family that started several companies, everything from railroads to railroad construction and demolition to tree sales to composting, to bakeries, you name it. We did it. My personal experience, although I started working when I was 9 in the Christmas tree business, was I started a coffee company in Boston. Believe it or not, I did a marketing project for school my sophomore year, and so in 1994, believe it or not, Starbucks was not in Boston. And so we became we sold Seattle's best coffee. And we had 5 little coffee stands in nice. Banks and one right at Downtown Crossing, which is right at the center of the retail district of Boston, at Filene's, which was a major department store. And so, it was interesting. So I did that then for the balance of my college career. I did it for 3 more years, ran, those, opened new ones. Did a couple more projects on it for school, so it worked out well. I did my senior thesis on it. They didn't have drive-thrus, and so at the time, they were just starting to think about drive-thrus. It was completely foreign in the New England market. Yep. By my senior year, the Starbucks had come to town, and they bought out a previous small, I think, 13-store business. But right there at the beginning, so it was simultaneous. It was awesome to do it. I was a finance major, so most of my colleagues were on their way to New York. And they just thought it was crazy that I must be this crazy guy from the West Coast that would wake up at 5, run down, start the business, get back, for a 9 o'clock class, run back down, but it really gave me a real idea of what it means, and how do you lead a small organization like that? How do you get funding? We self-financed. I put $5,000 into it. I think my dad gave us $15,000. My brother came out and he had $5,000. We literally bought all of our original product here in Spokane and loaded it into the 350 pickup. They didn't have Costco's there either, believe it or not. Yeah. So out here on North Foothills Drive, we bought our first coffee cart from Boyd Coffee Company, put it in the back of the pickup, stopped by Costco, bought some tables with chairs, and drove to Boston. So.
That's quite a story, fantastic. Isn't it?
Yeah.
So it's in your blood. It's in the DNA of the Condon family. Mayor, let's now fast forward to, you've had an incredible run as mayor of the City of Spokane for 8 years, and economic development is a big part of what you focus on. Absolutely. And entrepreneurship as a strategy for economic development. I'd really love to have you share with our viewers kind of, what you've seen, what you've experienced, how you've shaped it. I think you have a lot to share.
Well, I think, in the economic development world, especially in government, a lot of folks quickly look at recruiting, which is important and is a major component. But really what's exciting is like a day-to-day is on Coog's first day, is looking at our universities and what are they producing, looking at citizens that work in some of our companies now that have a new idea and take that idea to fruition. And when you really look at it, in this, the City of Spokane's growth dramatically was entrepreneurship. Right. Even in the energy sector, whether it's Engie that now has 1,000+ employees, international publicly traded company, Itron, Rely On. So that's just in the energy space.
Right.
You look at the egg and forestry world. What's happened with value add egg, in the wine industry, and now value add in other areas. It's exciting for me to see that WSU, through their research, is looking at gluten-free products, and what does that mean, and how do you develop it in the forestry area. This is the future of the built environment, of looking at CLT, cross-laminated timber, coming out of the forestry industry. So these are things that were intrinsic, and I haven't even touched on life sciences, but you look at the companies, those were developed here. And so there's kind of a couple key components. One is we do need to do the research here, whether it be in companies and they're doing their own R&D. We need to make sure we have the ability to patent that, and so some of the leading patent firms are right here in the city. And then you need to also have organizations like startup, because this is a network. Everybody wants to see, often, and especially in government, very hierarchical. It starts here and it ends here. Well, I'll tell you, in the world of entrepreneurship, it does not start on the left side of the graph and end on the right. There's a circle and a route and a backtrack and a whoops, it didn't work, and so you can't really do it that way. And so really a healthy entrepreneurial, is an ecosystem. It is not, it is not a direct line. And so ecosystems are tough. People spend their lives studying the ecosystem of an amoeba. Well, the entrepreneurial ecosystem is no different. But to sit there and make it look streamlined, and it does not make it effective. And so startup of putting this network together, keeping the network alive, finding out where there's a gap in the ecosystem, figuring out who can fill that. So it's very complex, and that's why it's so critical for entrepreneurs. I get it all the time, and now I literally can send them to startup and say, well, whether if startup doesn't have it, they definitely have the ecosystem that knows who does have it. And so that's exciting. And so as at the city, we have funded some of that.
Thank you.
But it's also about connecting this and also having a culture. Like I said, my experience when I was in New England going to school, entrepreneurship was not at the time in the DNA. Now I'll tell you, Boston has gone gangbusters on this. But at the time, you went to business school. You either went to New York and you went to finance, and you went where in a lot of cases where your dad used to, where there was some connection. They didn't have this entrepreneurial spirit. If you're an accountant, you stayed in Boston. The Big Five were there. We have always had that, I think, in the West, but we also need to get it even more, and that it's supported. I sit there and think, even in city government, I at one time thought, should we have startup in City Hall? Steve, you were leading it. Where do we do this? And I just thought it would be an amazing experiment to have startup folks sitting in the elevator with the city employee that's been there for 27 years, and they're doing amazing things, and talking to someone who's leaving at 6 in the morning because they just pulled an all-nighter because they're trying to get a package ready for maybe financing or something, and go, well, what are you doing today? Well, I'm coming to work. It's 8 o'clock, and well, I'm going home. And someone's saying, well, what do you do for insurance? Well, I don't really know. And and so and I just thought, and we've tried to foster that culture in City Hall of an entrepreneur's feeling for what we do in government, which is critical. It's not only for-profit business. We need that entrepreneurial system in government and nonprofits, and we have it. But you need to have the ecosystem that supports it.
Yeah, that's great.
Absolutely.
Thank you for saying all of that.
Yeah, and so what role does the city play in fostering that entrepreneurship? You talked a little bit about how the ecosystem thrives, but what's your role, and how do you actually create programs or systems that encourage those companies to take root?
Well, I think first and foremost is to tell the story, to see the successes that we have had and the growth. And like I said, when you really look at some of our true growth, it is from the basis of our industries here, and to highlight what those industries are, but where are they innovating. I would venture to guess, if you send out to the public and you say, what do you want to, what are your first thoughts when you think about the egg industry? They're going to quickly go to traditional egg, combines out on that is not the reality. We have the third top finance organization in the United States right here in Spokane that finances innovation. I went to their innovation summit in egg, and the last thing you saw, you saw drones.
I was going to say, it's all going autonomous,
You saw autonomous combines, you saw drones, and it's getting after being resilient and sustainable. So it's, and a lot of times, so I think one of them is the bully pulpit of the mayor's office, and as a city to talk about this and identify and be very proud and identify true foundational things of what we're doing. The second, you brought it up, it really is programmatic and partners. It's it's P2 and and so yes, we need to publicize it, but we also need to work through our partners. People don't go, I'm going to start a business and I'm going to go to City Hall. Well, that's and that's not a reality. Yeah. We do it through partners like Startup and so many others that are in these areas, industry associations, and so where we can financially support those, we need to do that for job growth. And then we also need to hold ourselves accountable to what programs are working, because in ecosystem things come and go, and so often too often in government, you start a program, it never ends because it's just too difficult, and that's why working with partners, especially in this space, because what was good yesterday, I mean, quite frankly, is not good next year. So as you're sitting there looking at this, you need to, or a new player comes on the scene and they really are filling that gap, so you don't need to do that anymore. So it needs to be, you need to publicize what we're doing, you need to work through our partners, and then you really need to hold ourselves accountable for the programs that are operating and making sure that they're meeting the needs.
Yeah, and Mary, you've been just a real champion of the public-private partnerships as it regards entrepreneurship. And we've had lots of conversations about where we put things in City Hall and some other surplus city properties that exist around the community. But your sense, we've made good progress?
Well, I'll tell you, we have, and
leading question, obviously.
Well, no, and I think you guys, you say it in spades. You see these companies that are growing here. You're now seeing, Startup put out. This is, we have the image about really now companies are looking at, if we're going to start up, we're going to go to Spokane. More recently, just one top of mind right now. Rover is a new tech company in the animal care sector. Their development is happening in Seattle. When I visited them just probably 8 months ago in their offices, they had about 35-50 people. They just leased a floor and a half of the new Wonder building that'll hold 100 or a couple hundred people, if not more. And they really see the benefit, the talent pool. That's probably one I didn't touch on, but entrepreneurs do want that talent, and so how do we incorporate the universities? How do we incorporate the community colleges? In a family of entrepreneurs, about half of us have college degrees and the other half don't. And I'll be honest with you, that it has had no direct impact on what the outcome of those success of those businesses were, as I look at it. And so that's exciting to see.
Good. Well, we're having a great holistic conversation with the mayor of the City of Spokane, David Condon. Stay with us. We'll be right back on Startup Spokane on Spokane Talks Media.
They say it takes a community to raise a family. It also takes one to build a business. I came to Spokane 12 years ago as a Whitworth student, and I planned to leave after graduation. But the more I got to know this community, the more I wanted to become a part of it. My husband and I have built our business in Spokane, and now we're raising our family here too. We operate a consulting company that provides creative business development strategies. Our approach is holistic and dependent on intentional connections and relationships. And no one understands connections and relationships better than GSI. They direct momentum towards investments in our community, provide resources that help business leaders connect, and they're dedicated and passionate about making Spokane great. GSI gives me the confidence to build my business here because they believe every organization, even a small one like mine, adds big value to our community. With GSI's help, Spokane will be a place my son will want to build his career too. I'm Eva Marquette, owner of Freshview. We're creating something greater with Greater Spokane Incorporated.
Hi, this is Kurt Stockwell with Well Dressed Walrus. We are a local website design and development company here in Spokane. What we do is build beautiful, usable websites for local businesses. A website needs to be beautiful, it needs to be usable for your users, your customers, and yourself. Contact us anytime. We'd love to talk with you about your online marketing.
Welcome to a new kind of talk show, Spokane Talks, where you find news, views, and conversations that include respect for opinions, facts, and diversity.
Spokane Talks, Saturdays at 8 a.m. on Fox 28.
Welcome back. We're having a fantastic conversation with Mayor Condon about entrepreneurship in the city of Spokane. And Mayor, we covered a lot of ground before our first break, so thank you. It was awesome. I want to take a couple of minutes and just talk about why Spokane is really the perfect place for people to look to move here to start and grow and run a business.
Well, absolutely. And working with startup and looking, first and foremost, what is the cost, right? And seeing how much farther the dollars go. I think we have a graphic that we can put up, but some 85% farther in Spokane. And so as you're talking to venture capitalists and others, when they know that their money's not going to be tied up in overhead and Class A office space rent and things like that, and really goes towards the talent. Number two is what I just said, is having access to that talent.
Yep.
And with the universities, 70,000 students, we really are starting to see that talent that are part of that culture that want to try something new. You know, and so as you're coming out of college or maybe 2 or 3 years out, those folks are really attracted to working with a small company, a startup, being on something new, and so you need to have that talent pool.
And it doesn't really require them to export out, right, to find jobs.
So it really is. It's a combination where we started with let's start and do startup and grow from within and entrepreneurship,
right.
But it works both directions.
That's right.
The third piece, so if it's cost first, absolutely, access to talent so that they can build this. The number three is a quality of life. A lot of your entrepreneurs are leaving, say, corporate life because of a quality of life decision, and that's where we launched Hacking Washington. And this is that life hack. How can you have a shorter commute? How can you have access to the outdoors? How can you work hard but play hard?
Right.
And a lot of folks that are in that culture, and me included, and many of ours want that life. And so we launched Hacking Washington, really focused on the I-5 corridor, focused on alumni of our universities and bringing them back to Spokane and showing them what's going on right now and what they can have, whether they can buy their first house, whether they can have access to the outdoors, what our nightlife is, and what our arts are. And so I invite folks to go to hackingwashington.com. You can also go to, and how do you hack Washington? You choose Spokane.
That's right.
And so you can go to Choose Spokane. That's our economic development portal for the city, and really look at, what's available to small and startup businesses. And it's working. I just had a gentleman that's on his second startup, quite far through the startup. He has closed on his third round of VC funding in the $100 million range, but looking for the talent. He's following talent, to be honest with you. His talent wants to live in Spokane, and they realize that if they want to keep that talent, they need to look at Spokane as an option. And so that's happening. I mentioned Rover, same thing. They followed talent. They also followed, hearing from their senior management, of looking at the resiliency of Spokane. Literally, they run a 24/7 worldwide operation. So does this other organization. And looking at Spokane and the resiliency we have of whether it's power production or whether it's the weather and those sorts of things, that's a real reality to them, notwithstanding the impacts of what happens sometimes on the I-5 corridor.
Right.
Well, and I have to say that I see the results of that daily, too. I have people coming in saying, well, we've just moved back. We just made this leap. And we're hopeful that we can find the employment that will back that up because we need to change our life. What we were doing in Silicon Valley or Seattle or Portland, it just wasn't working for us. And so that's been really interesting to see. Not only are we keeping more of our local homegrown talent or talent from the universities, but we're also attracting talent from these other hub cities.
And literally the last 24 hours, I met a gentleman that moved up from Southern California. He bought a company here in Spokane. I have to give it to the company owners. They decided to sell to him because he was going to keep it local. Their other option was to sell it to a regional company that would have taken over the client base but not moved the office here.
Right.
And so they wanted that local ownership. The second one was a gentleman that moved and bought another company, and he moved over from the west side. His wife got a senior job over here, and he bought another company and moved over and left the corporate. And so you're starting to see in a major way this coming.
And even I want to build on that just for a second. One of the observations I have is we're bringing in these individuals that are globally connected.
Yes.
So the network, the relational networks are continuing to just spread virally for us and getting us into other connections that we wouldn't have otherwise if not for these
What's
people
been
coming
really
here.
fun too is as some of our startups have grown, it's allowed us to start making connections outside of our area as they start to outgrow the capital resources that are available here. We can put them in touch through these relationships with investors who will take them to the next phase.
Yeah,
Beyond
and in
what
fact,
we,
we won't give specifics, but we're working with a startup that was funded by Mind to Market, and they were just down in the Silicon Valley making a presentation this week, I think for the second time.
Yeah.
And those connections would not have come if not for some of the people that we've attracted to live in our region. So
it definitely is it's a cost issue and where that investment is. It's a talent piece.
Right.
But then it's also how do we differentiate ourselves as a city, as a region, as a metropolitan area, and then how do we celebrate it? So last year we had the first ever foreground, and really looking at the arts, looking at business, looking at education, and really who's on the forefront, who is laying the foreground for the future in each and one of those areas. So it's exciting to see whether we have venture capitalists coming into town with the Angel Alliance, then they're going to something like Terrain, or they're going to a nationally, if not internationally, notarized speaker. And so that's it'll be the couple first weeks of October.
Right.
And really, I invite people to check it out. You'll see what happened last year if you go to the Foreground website, and really looking at that program, because we need to not only celebrate to ourselves, which is very important, because often I find, which is mind-boggling, that people don't know what's going on,
even locally,
but then also invite people into town to see what's happening.
Yeah, exactly. I think the broader awareness piece is incredible, and Foreground is just a really great foundation for doing that. It's sort of like Spokane's version of South by Southwest.
I was
right?
just down at South by Southwest. My first time, I was with 25 mayors down there, and they invite us down to look at what's at the forefront of government, and what are we doing. So they have a whole track now called Civic IQ of really looking, and it was fascinating to me. I'd never been to South by Southwest, and really that's what Foreground will start looking like, of what's happening here. What are we doing with Urbanova and the Smart City Initiative? What are we doing in the entrepreneurial scene? What are we doing in the educational scene? What are we doing in the arts? And how do we bring this together and celebrate it, and then show it off to the region?
Absolutely. So, Mayor, as you're coming to the end of your second term, and I mean, you're well loved by lots of people, all of your citizens. I think everyone says, I hear all the time, the best mayor we've ever had. So thank you for your service. What do you hope for the future of entrepreneurship? I mean, is there something we need to keep our eyes focused on? Don't take your eye off this ball. What advice do you have for, say, the next round of leadership at the City of Spokane?
A couple of years ago, we launched One Spokane. It's our strategic vision, our strategic plan, and really our strategic voice. And we need to keep that going. And these are all tenets that really lead us to a healthy environment or entrepreneurial culture. And often, and especially in government, we look for direct outcomes. And I would suggest, and especially in this scene, we need to do that. Don't get me wrong. But like I said from the start, this is an ecosystem, and ecosystems are very temperamental. One of our biggest projects is cleaning up the Spokane River. So I get very involved in the biosciences of the Spokane River. This is no different. Right. And we need to continue to do that. I also think as we look, if there's a focus area, is to continue to attract and grow entrepreneurial companies. What are the patents coming out of our companies? It's very important to have them come out of our universities, but I would say it's more important to have companies that are focused on internal research.
Absolutely.
And then also, if you could do that, then build it on what are our foundational industries. And so in energy, in life sciences, in ag forestry, because we have amazing talent in those. In all of those, when you look to the future, when you look at what's happening in food science and diet and health and in our planet and the use of water and sustainability, you look at energy and you think about what that impact is on all of those areas. You look at health, and I'll tell you, when you bring those three together, that's where Spokane is on the tip of the spear there, and we need to continue to do that. But we need to keep that ecosystem alive, and it starts every day. And and you don't pat yourself on the back as an accomplishment and job well done or job finished or mission complete. Yes, you celebrate your successes, but like many entrepreneurs know, the day you take a vacation, things start rolling back. So the work is cut off.
I was going to say, how does that resonate?
Megan's leadership and your leadership to be this. I mean, 8 years ago, to have the idea of an ecosystem of startup was a fantasy. I remember meeting in my conference room, sitting there going, well, heck, can we throw out some of these, cubicles here on the 7th floor and start something there? But to see people come and really do that, and to see that, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, I'm glad that you've shared that, and that's what you've seen from your perspective. Because I think when you started 8 years ago, lots of parts and pieces, but they just weren't. It wasn't all put together. No. Yep. So, and Megan, how does all this resonate with you?
Well, I think that the likening of it to any delicate ecosystem is really spot on, because every day we're adjusting and drawing new things into the ecosystem, and then there's adjustments that happen and identifying new gaps that have opened up or new opportunities. And so, it's absolutely keeping that going. And I think that's one of the things that startup is really plugged into, is knowing who's doing what, where, and how it's changing, so that we can make sure that we're not leaving wide open gaps.
Yeah, I think, the mission of startup is really continually to look at the gaps and the needs and filling those. Mayor Condon, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule today to share your wisdom and knowledge that you have in your DNA on entrepreneurship. Thanks for your tremendous leadership. We're going to miss you. Join us.
I'm not going anywhere.
Okay, I know. Good. That's good. I'm glad you're staying around, because you'd be a great asset to the community. Join us for future podcasts where we host other resources and entrepreneurs on Startup Spokane on Spokane Talks Media. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for watching. Startup Spokane is produced in Spokane, Washington by SpokaneTalksMedia.com, which is solely responsible for its content. Startup Spokane is brought to you in part by Greater Spokane Incorporated's Startup Spokane and Well Dressed Walrus. Ask Steve and Megan a question, recommend a guest, or hear this program again on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or SpokaneTalksMedia.com.